Hey there, everybody. It's Jesse Weber, and welcome to Law and Crime Now. This is where we take your questions about some of the biggest cases that we're covering. I'm going to have with me executive trial producer Kathy Rustin, who will be fielding those questions for us. And today we have a great show. A little bit later on in the program, we're going to focus on the Todd Mullis case. But to start, we have something very special for you. A few days ago, I had the opportunity to sit down with Jodi Arias' former attorney, Kirk Nurmi, and he had some choice words to describe his former client. Take a look. Jodi Arias, that's a name that many of you true crime fans probably know. Again, this was that Arizona woman who was convicted and sentenced to life in prison for the 2008 brutal murder of her former boyfriend, Travis Alexander. It's a conviction that actually recently was upheld by the Arizona Court of Appeals. And now we're going to talk about something interesting because it was a case that caught the nation by storm. Everybody was talking about it. It was absolutely huge. And a lot of people were featured in that trial. And there's one person in particular who had a lot of attention, and that was the man who represented Jodi Arias. Kirk Nurmi is with me today, and it's great to have him here. Kirk, I'm so happy you're here with us on Law and Crime, and I want to start right from the latest decision. As I said, her conviction was recently upheld by Arizona's top court, and you released a statement that said that you are thrilled and that this whole ordeal caused you a great deal of pain. So as you sit there today, what are your feelings towards Jodi Arias?
Well, one of the things I say, people ask me, do I loathe her, that sort of thing. And I really don't. I don't have a lot of feelings towards her. It's part of my past. I'm not a fan, but I just kind of was part of my life, and I move on from there. I don't give her a lot of thought.
Well, let me ask you, you received a lot of criticism, particularly when the trial was going on, and you hated for a lot of different reasons. A lot of people, because you just were representing her and what she was accused of, but you also were criticized by people who were on her side and said that you didn't do enough to protect her and to save her. What do you say to those people?
Well, I say to a lot of people, one, there's a lot of misunderstandings about why I was Miss Arias' attorney. To the first group of people, I say that I was court ordered to keep her case even after I left the public defender's office. So I had obligations to tell her story. Whether people believe her story or not, or whether I believe her story or not, I still had the obligation to do it. And as far as the members of what I call Jodi's cult, I don't think too much about what they think, because they have all sorts of weird theories, and I really don't pander to them or pay any real attention to them.
Well, you talk about the theories in the statement that you released upon the affirmation of her conviction. You said Miss Arias used a portion of this opportunity, referring to the statement she made to court, to admit committing the crime of first-degree murder against her former lover. So all these years later, what do you really think happened to Travis Alexander? Do you believe that Jodi Arias murdered him, or do you believe that this was a crime or of passion, a heat of passion, which was what was argued during the trial phase?
Well, I guess you have to read my book. There's a lot of details in that book about what I think happened. But I believe Miss Arias went over to Mr. Alexander's house. I believe there were some issues. She was trying to get some things from him, and things turned into murder.
So it wasn't manslaughter?
No, I realized in 2013, I laid out a theory where I thought a manslaughter would have been viable, and that would have been the defense that I would have gone with. But like I say, it gets rather detailed, probably too detailed for this interview, but people can look it over and take a look at my theory about what happened in my latest book.
Okay, so let's talk about this book, and I want to refer to the book Trapped with Miss Arias. This book, you were ultimately penalized by the state bar. You relinquished your law license. Jodi Arias filed a lawsuit against you, saying a violation of attorney-client privilege. I guess the question is, do you think you went too far in the book? Do you regret writing the book? I mean, it seems like it caused a bunch of heartache.
I don't think so, because remember back in April 2015, when I was finally released from her after 5.5 years or so of involuntary servitude, as I call it, during that process, she had told some lies about me, basically saying that the defense that Mr. Alexander was an abusive pedophile was my idea when it wasn't. 2.5 years ago, when she said that statement in April of 2013, or excuse me, May of 2013, I was going to impose truth upon that lie. And years later, I probably would have let it go until the stress of being Miss Arias' lawyer, dealing with her and everything involved in it, brought cancer into my life. And given that Miss Arias, as we know, let's put it mildly, has a propensity to slander the legacy of the deceased, I did not want to give her the opportunity to do that without imposing truth upon her lies. The bar took issue with that, but they wanted to suspend me for 4 years, and I wanted to move on. So I asked for disbarment because I didn't want to practice law anymore and be in the same situation that I was in back in 2013.
Well, first of all, I'm glad you're doing better. I mean, we all read about the diagnosis and the treatment, so I'm glad that you're doing well today. The question, of course, if you go back to that, is the reason you didn't want to be an attorney anymore purely based upon this case? I mean, was it all about that, or was there something else that you said, I just had enough of the whole profession?
Well, I mean, it's hard to separate. When back in 2011, when I really wanted to lead Miss Arias's case, and when I was going to go into a simpler sort of practice, you know, that was because I wanted to change away from death penalty work. But when I got done with the Arias case, I was just done. I just felt a calling in my heart to start doing other things, like my speaking, like my shows, and some of the other books that I've written.
You spoke about the lawsuit. If you can tell us, what is the current status of her lawsuit against you? Because I remember you said you're going to fight this vigorously.
Sure, you bet, and I look forward to doing that, and as well as any of her post-conviction relief attempts. But to make a long story short, Jesse, she filed 3 claims against me, 2 of which dealt with the breach of fiduciary duty, breach of attorney-client privilege. The court ruled in my favor and dismissed those counts, meaning I didn't breach attorney-client privilege according to the court. The sole remaining count now relates to her, the damage she's claiming that my choice to write a book would have on her right to a fair trial, should she receive one. And of course, until she's done with all her machinations and legal maneuverings, which I'm sure we'll see some very shortly, Miss Arias has that 1 count remaining.
Let me ask you this. If there was a situation where she was ultimately found not guilty, she was released from prison, and she were to be living her life, do you think she would have ended up in trouble again? I mean, this is a woman who was detailed in quite a way about who she was and what she was up to. But if she was found not guilty, where do you think she would be today?
Boy, Jesse, I don't know. That's a question that I can't even begin to contemplate. I think justice played out, and like I say in my book, she's where she should be. So that question is just one that's too hard to answer. Who knows?
Well, I have another question I want to ask you before we let you go, and it's about
Sure.
Juan Martinez, who was the prosecutor on this case. Appeals court said that he engaged in misconduct, particularly how he questioned defense witnesses, bullying, that he was placed recently on paid administrative leave, 7 bar complaints, including sexual misconduct allegations. What do you think about all the problems surrounding Juan Martinez?
Well, I don't really know much about the history with the county attorney's office and any of their internal investigations. So I can't really comment on that. And you won't see me defending his behavior in the court, because I made objections to that I think were very valid. The one thing I'll say is that one consistent theme about Miss Arias is she makes the choice to go after the men that she believes have wronged her. And myself and Mr. Martinez, and of course, most prominently, Mr. Alexander, stand as examples of that.
Kirk Nurmi, thank you so much for coming on. Appreciate you taking the time. It was a fascinating case to cover. It was a fascinating case to learn about, and we're still talking about it all these years later. We wish you the best of luck, and thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Jesse.
All right, Kathy, I got to get your attention to this. I got to get your perspective on this. Involuntary servitude, propensity to ultimately tarnish the legacy of the deceased. You were in that courtroom during the Jodi Arias case. What'd you make of what you just heard from Kirk Nurmi?
I was in that courtroom during the penalty retrial phase. What I found interesting about what he said is he believes that she went there to retrieve some of her stuff and it turned into a killing. If that's the case, why does she bring a gun when she's never ever carried a gun in her life? Why does she turn her cell phone off? Why does she bring gas cans so she doesn't have to stop and get gas? She hid all traces of her going from California to Arizona, and she brought a gun. So I do find his comment interesting. No one really ever know what happened, because we do know that they had intimate relations when she was there, and then he ends up brutally killed after that. And was that her intention all along? But it sure seemed like it, because she did everything she could to cover her tracks.
Kind of wild to hear the fact that this is a guy who did posit a manslaughter theory, now saying it was murder, and clearly turning about face on his client, or former client. So very interesting to hear. Again, if you're just joining us, this is Law and Crime Now. We're taking your questions about some of the big cases that we've been covering. And today we're going to continue our coverage of Todd Mullis. This was an interesting case, and I'll tell you why. This was that Iowa man who was ultimately convicted of murdering his wife with a corn rake. Now, his sentencing, and he could face potentially life in prison without the possibility of parole, that's the mandatory sentence, was supposed to happen today, but it got pushed off because of the coronavirus, and now it's set for July 14th. And he's actually seeking a new trial based upon a piece of evidence, and specifically this 911 phone call that was played. The jury heard it, but more importantly, what did the prosecution say to Todd Mullis about this phone call? We're going to play you a clip from the trial. This was when Todd Mullis was on the stand. He spoke in his own defense, and then under cross-examination, here's what happened.
Now, Todd, here I'm gonna play you the part where you're doing the chest compressions, and I'm just gonna ask that you listen in between the chest compressions, okay? Now, Todd, did you just hear that whisper at the end of that?
Yes.
And what did you whisper?
I couldn't hear it.
Okay, I'm gonna play it again. Todd, do you whisper cheating whore right there?
No.
So you don't remember what you whispered?
No.
Okay, I'm gonna play another clip for you. Do you know what you whispered there?
No.
Did you hear that? So I'm gonna play that part one more time. The first clip is 6:53 of that second tape, and this second one is right at 0700. Just try to listen really closely. I just want to know if you remember what you said. Right there, do you say "go to hell, cheating whore"?
No.
So you don't hear that?
No.
You didn't hear at 6:53 cheating whore. You didn't hear that.
I didn't hear that word.
And it's right at that, after you hear a ping, you don't hear "go to hell, cheating whore."
No.
All right, and now the defense is saying it was totally unfair for the prosecution to suggest what he was saying on the tape without definitive proof, tainted the jury, they want a new trial. Putting my lawyer cap on, that's a very high standard to get a new trial. I mean, in Iowa, you have to show that it was contrary to the law or evidence. Not sure he's going to be able to get it, but I want to bring in my guests right now who can talk more about the physical aspect of this case. Forensic death investigator from Jacksonville State University, Joseph Scott Morgan, is with us. Kathy, let's get to some viewer questions because I know there's a ton for Joseph lined up.
Oh, yes, we do have a lot of questions. First of all, I have to just give my own statement. Every time I hear that 911 call, and I've probably listened to it 20 times, that I can never hear "go to hell, cheating whore." So it does shock me that that was allowed to come in front of the jury. All right, Joseph Scott Morgan. Why did the medical examiner rule this a homicide versus accident? There are many people that still believe it was an accident.
Well, I think the first thing that came out was that, we kept hearing that she had fallen on this corn rake, which looks like a medieval torture device. If people at home haven't seen this thing, Well, you can't fall twice on this thing, I don't think, and get these injuries in that proximity. So that gives the forensic pathologist the indication that this was a two-strike event. Most people are not going to fall on something that brings this much pain, remove it from those defects, and then fall on it again.
And let's not forget for a second here that initially we thought the defense was going to say this was an accident, but in their opening statement, remember what they said? They said this was a murder. It just wasn't Todd who did this. Kathy, let's get to another question for Joseph.
Right. Joseph, many people are asking about the timing of this murder, killing. The son was 13 years old at the time, and he gave several different versions of how long his father was out of his sight. But really, a minute 45 seconds is what resonates with people. How could he have had enough time to leave the barn where they were working, go over to the shed, kill her in this manner, and I'm assuming it's twice with this, and get back in a very quick amount of time?
Well, if he's got her disabled in some way, keep in mind, I believe in my heart of hearts that he struck her. She's got a significant injury to her jaw, where I think she was probably popped in the jaw. She's got injuries to her knees and her hands, and he subdued her to that point. He's a big strapping guy. I think that he could have done this pretty quickly. Also, these two injuries, just so that people understand at home, this thing was readjusted. It was initially a strike from the back, from her lower portion down onto her body, where these go from above to below. Then the next strike is literally changing attitude, still striking her on the back, but the trajectory is from below to above. So he readjusted in this and left her there to die.
The prosecution really here, Joseph, what's so shocking and so frightening is they painted a picture of a guy who not only killed his wife, but then staged the scene to have his son discover the body. And if you couple that with him saying cheating whore on that 911 phone call, you can see the picture that was painted for this jury. Kathy, I see the questions are rolling in for Joseph right now, so let's keep them coming. Keep them coming. A lot of people have questions about the Todd Mullis case.
Okay. Would it be strange that Todd had no injuries on his face, hands, anywhere on his body with this kind of a killing?
Well, to a certain degree. I would question how closely he may have been examined at that point in time by the police. I don't recall, and maybe this happened. Jesse and I actually covered this trial live together all those months ago. I don't ever remember seeing images. Many times when people go to court, they'll put images up upon arrest that they'll take of the hands, they'll take them of the face of the accused, that sort of thing, at the jail. I don't recall seeing anything like that. It doesn't mean that it didn't happen. Was he properly examined at the time? Again, he's a big guy. She's very diminutive compared to him, and I think he just struck her down with a couple of really mighty blows.
See, what's interesting were the people out there who really do believe that he's innocent. I guess the time frame of how he all did this just doesn't make sense to a lot of people. But then the question is, who else would have wanted Amy dead? Who else would have taken that effort, Joseph, to kill her with a rake? If you believe what the prosecution they put forward, what kind of person kills his wife in this manner and ultimately, again, stages it so his son discovers the body? Couple that again with him saying cheating whore on the 911 tape. We talk about the psychology of people that do this. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, this isn't much different than, this is a very personal crime, and we throw that term around a lot in forensics, particularly profilers do, which I am not one. But I've seen enough cases of extreme violence to know that there's a tremendous amount of anger involved in this. Again, I have to go back to this idea that you're going to use this device in order to kill this woman who you have a family with, that you've lived with for a number of years, and in such a brutal manner. And this is a proximal case. This is not something where you're shooting somebody at a great distance. And if I can just go back to the injury she sustained, one of the ways that she is disabled in this is that this injury went directly into her specific viscera that are going to really inhibit her ability to move around. She's bleeding out into the interstitial spaces, probably in her lungs and into her open chest, or, into her pleural spaces. He's nicked a bunch of vessels in there. This is a very debilitating shot that she took 2 of.
Yeah, it's horrible to think about. Kathy, I know our time's coming to an end, so let's see if we can get some more questions, 1 or 2.
Yeah, and I will just say really quick about no injuries, whether he did it or whoever did it. I think it's very, I think you wouldn't have injuries. She was attacked from behind. It appears it was very quick. So I don't know the injury thing says anything one way or the other. We have another question. Is there any reason to believe the son was an accomplice? And I think this goes to the fact that he gave varying stories. At first, he gave a few different interviews that said where he said his dad was never out of his sight. And then that changed over time to where he said he'd gotten a drink of water and he left a couple of different times. But is there anything out there to say that that son would be an 13-year-old?
Well, yeah, I mean, if this guy's an intimidating person, he could probably, I guess the possibility exists. There's a number of cases like that in the literature where you have, let's face it, this is a kid. He's 13 years old. You got a dad that's dominating. He may have said, boy, you better keep your mouth shut about what you've just seen. And he's going to be terrified of it. I know at 13, I would have been terrified, particularly if you bear witness to the fact that your mom's just been slaughtered in front of your very eyes. So I don't think that that's a long way to go in order to, to kind of make that happen. I'm not suggesting that it did, but it's certainly within the realm of possibility if people want to go down the route that this kid is an accomplice, which I still not believe in.
Joseph, 10 seconds, real quick, jumping off that. But everything you've seen looks like one person killed this woman, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, it is. It was a sudden strike, I think. The first strike knocked her to the ground, removed the rake. She's down on the ground. He nails her again.
Well, it's horrible to think about, but clearly people have theories about what happened here, and we're going to be there. Hopefully, everything's cleared up for the sentencing on July 14th. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Please stay safe, and we will be back later this week.